So, hello. This video is about various things, about the public comments, really. And it's to everybody, but it's also to you, Kuntika. So, but not everything is said probably exactly to Kuntika. It's on this issue that Kuntika and I have been discussing or circling or something. Okay, first of all, just to be clear, is the internet a commons? I think it should be considered a commons. That's how it should be legislated. That's what the situation should be, right? I think, however, in the many years, for example, I've been on YouTube, there's no tendency towards that, right? You have laws about the internet content that have restricted it more. The the part of society that is making the internet a commons act like one is almost like some inert momentum of internet tradition, right? And we see right now maybe a sharp turn towards a different kind of moderation that will balkanize people and do that. Obviously, I'm not into that. I search out people I disagree with. So I think it should be a commons, but I don't think that that's the way the law is going. And I don't get to decide if it's treated as a commons, right? And I don't ask the question of, well, what is it essentially? Essentially, it's a technology and ideas. And, you could set up a network and it's not a commons, like your local area network, right? You could set up one and treat it as a commons. And I think in my original post, which was about the defense, like the fact that Twitter is a private entity, meaning they could censor even if it was unfair, right? Even if you said, well, it's unfair, it's still they're private, they're allowed to decide who comes in unless there's a specific law like a civil rights law. You can't discriminate based on this. I compared that to, Rand Paul, who's like, you don't have to make a law that people have to serve African Americans or can't exclude based on that because it's bad business. Pointing out, yeah, until it happens to you, and then you see, oh, yeah, business is not the best way to deal with this. It's not the most rational way to deal with a situation like this. So the internet, I think, what I think is it's complicated though, right? If somebody put up a server, and let's say there were just millions of people loved knitting and talking about knitting, and so there was a Twitter, but it was all about knitting, and the people were like, it's about knitting. It's called knittingtwit.com. Then, I don't want to tell them they have to let people post about not knitting. But here's the kind of thing. I think there could be some sort of a extension of our concept of the carriers. So, like, the phone company became a carrier and was regulated as a carrier. If two criminals are talking on the phone network, Ma Bell was not liable for that. And then Ma Bell also couldn't listen to them and decide whether to connect them based on what they were going to say or who they were or anything like that. Even criminals can talk on the phone system, right? They're a carrier, right? So they can't listen in and say, hey, these people are talking shit about Ma Bell and cancel their phone call. That was not allowed. And really, they're not even allowed to listen to it without some judicial process, at least, justifying it, since it's technically possible. And they're sort of an inert party in that as well. Some other body is saying, hey, we have the right, they can't just on their own go and start recording all the conversations. Now, with computers, it's weird because, of course, they have to. It's a data stream. Things are backed up. Of course, your tweets are being recorded. How else could they appear on the internet? So I believe you could extend the carrier law to other entities and those entities could be allowed to voluntarily enter into it, right? There would, like, if you wanted to have an internet service that wasn't criminally liable for the conversations that were held in it, you would register as a carrier, right? Then the people that had the conversation in your pub about robbing the bank, they're responsible, not you, right? And you should be able to register for this kind of thing. And I think it also extends to the brick and mortar world when we're talking about cakes and cafes. So those are two examples. One is, if you want to if you make cakes for a living, should you have to make a cake for a gay wedding? And I actually think that's a very much borderline case, because a wedding cake is kind of a piece of art, and I don't think you can insist that an artist work for whoever has money. That's kind of like we're slaves to money. You just because somebody's willing to pay you for your service doesn't mean you have to accept it, and the reason that you accept it is somewhat personal. But when it comes to a cafe, and you have Rand Paul and people like that saying that the market could mediate the racism, I say no. The person that owns that cafe is worried about making a living. They might not even be racist, and the people in their town they think are racist. So, they make this rule because they're worried about losing all their white clients. And who knows? In a science fiction story, they could even be wrong, and none of the people in town were racist. Everybody was just worried that other people were racist, and oh, what a bad business decision, and it still gets made. Okay, so like Quintica says that um, trying to block alt-right people, which Twitter is allegedly doing, according to some. I don't know. I don't use Twitter. I have no idea. But I do know they banned Milo, or Milo, whichever it is, and that's hurting their stock price. As a business decision, it's a bad decision. Well, guess what? Businesses make bad business decisions all the time, along with some good ones. I mean, yes, that's one reason you don't want to rely on them as if it was a judicial system designed to make the best decision with the best processes of evidence collection, etc. The best standards. Just what somebody thought one day in a marketing, in some sort of conference room. Okay, so again, I think the internet should be considered as a commons, but I don't think that legally that's the direction we've been going in. Okay, so in a way, I'm telling you, like, I learn arguments of other people that I disagree with, and I will take seriously the strength of those arguments. And the fact that Google servers, Twitter servers are all private property with private cables that hook to other private companies, private cables, that provides a complication that I was curious about your answer, Quintica, on why you think it's a commons. Now, I agree with you that, well, the government invented this whole idea. It was invented as a commons. Yes, but the government has a policy of putting those things it invents in the public domain, and just trusting American businesses to work in the national interest with it naturally by being American and making money off of them and then paying taxes, and that's supposed to be good enough. And it reminds me of the fact that, American government funded research and in military research has done a lot with robotics, and that robotics are then putting taxpayers out of work, the very people and the children of the people that paid for that research. That should be some sort of a commons. So, yeah, that's a good argument, but the fact is, it's an argument that we should consider as a commons things that were developed by the public interest, by the public funds. We should think about those things. But our system doesn't actually legally recognize that. The fact that the government invented the internet or built the first version or whatever, however you want to put that, doesn't ensure that it's considered a commons. I wish. I'm trying to make conversation where maybe you will help fill in some missing bricks of how come we can't convince the society to treat it as a commons. I don't know. Why won't Trump and all these other 70-year-old white guys treat it as a commons? Why won't the hip uh, sax playing white guy treat it as a commons? What maybe he arguably did. Why won't Barack Obama treat it as a commons? Why is it not happening? That's the purpose of the conversation, would be to find that. And yes, I believe in this public research hook is something important. I just don't think that I can say how that the argumentation there's an argumentation from that convinces other people. I'm convinced by it. The public funds developed it. The public needs to benefit. And in the case of communication, that has to do with free speech, meaning we have a public commons for free speech. But I do have this technical idea that the way you do that is a website that starts up. If they only want to talk about yarn and stuff, they might not be able to sign up for the free, for being a carrier. And then if their yarn site, people start talking about robbing a bank, they might be charged as one of the conspirators. And if they want not to, they want to eliminate the liability for that kind of thing, then they have to be a carrier, meaning they can't censor, as much. Obviously, with censorship, we're talking about blocking legal speech, not blocking things that are illegal like criminal conspiracy. All right, and so I'm trying to have a conversation. I'm not trying to prove you wrong on this subject. I made a video, the original point about a private company can do whatever they want, and conservatives say so they shouldn't have to sell the cake, so they shouldn't necessarily have to let them in. The market will take care of that. And Twitter is a private company. So I'm pointing that out. That's what I'm pointing out to provoke this issue. And you and I have had a lot of differences recently, but I think we also allegedly or probably have a lot of political positions that we have in common compared to, say, at least a few generations ago and certain people. So the fact that we're having these differences doesn't eliminate the fact that, I'm curious, what's your idea on why it's a commons? And you just want to seem to say, no, it is a commons, because it is a commons. It is a commons. Some people disagree with you and me on that. So what you do is you build an argument about why it ought to be thought that way. Now, the root of this argument seems to be, in your case, and in my case, partially, right? Whether it was public research or not, to me, is separate, right? Like Alexander Bell, the phone company, arguably, you can always argue it was public, but I mean, more arguably private. Doesn't matter. To me, it's more how it gets used in the end. But I also agree that since the government created it, and we have these other issues like with robotics, where the government funding something that then hurts people, the profit from that should help the people. So I was just talking about if private companies can decide based on anything, including your political position or anything else, then you're saying private company. So people should not be upset that a baker has to bake a cake for a gay couple and be upset that we don't let the market decide whether a businessman gets away with having, a black only or white only clientele explicitly. That relates to the private company Twitter. My position is that these companies should all have to decide whether they're an open carrier or not, right? And a cake baker probably doesn't need to worry about the liability, right? If they would not be a carrier, they would not be want to go in the public space catalog because they're actually looking at every cake. And if a cake says rob the bank at 3 p.m., they don't make that one either. And if they do, maybe they're a conspirator. Whereas a cafe that is open to the public, right? If you want to get customers that become part of your club, then that's different. But if you're open to the public, your door's just open, you don't want to be liable for conversations people have in their booth because you don't listen to them all. But maybe one person was a cop and the cops know and you don't. You want to not have to listen to your people. Suddenly you're a carrier, and because you say, oh, I need to be a public space or a carrier where I'm not responsible for all the conspiracies and communicate. I'm not responsible for the communication that I carry, that I provide a location for or a network for. Okay, so hopefully that is a fucking clear explanation of my position and how we get to this point. You seem confused. Can you go back and see old videos that are consistent with the comments that I left you? You just don't seem to understand, which is fine. Please let me fucking explain. That's the whole position. I still believe the internet should be held as a commons. I agree with you that philosophically you could say, well, it is common. Some people just don't recognize it. But you also have to acknowledge people are not recognizing that. And also, that was years and years ago where recognition of that has been lost and lost and lost. And the public supports the internet being, spied on and manipulated by intelligence and NSA monitoring and stuff. It's not going in my direction that this is a common space where you have some right to be, right? And I do think that that is something important we should work on, right? But then again, it's understandable in my case, being somewhat liberal on these things. I don't believe there is no role for regulation in things or no role for imposing a certain perspective on things, like that there is free speech, that the internet is a commons, that certain kinds of carriers, based on their size or their purpose or what they do or their profit, should be treated and regulated a certain way. For example, to create the reality of it being treated like a commons, right? And I want to end with, I think there's a technical thing here that works very good and is a very tiny little idea, that it's hard to say who should have to carry all voices. If the Catholic Church has their website, do they really have to, not ban Satanists? And I think the answer is you make each organization choose. Are you a carrier or not? If you are not, then you better moderate your stuff well. Because if you open it up to the public and people use it to make a plan to rob a bank, then you can be considered liable in that conspiracy. And if you don't plan to watch what people are saying anyway, you just want to carry videos and insert ads in the front and make some money off of being AT&T and carrying all the phone calls and charging for the phone calls, and you're willing to ignore what the content is, then you would be immune to prosecution for conspiracy because of those communications. And by conspiracy, I mean anything illegal that might happen on those airwaves that you don't know about because you have a wall between you and that actual content. You are the carrier.